The DIESOL podcast.
Digital integration in English as a second or other language.
Episode 15, Encouraging Independent Learning During the Pandemic.
All right, welcome to DIESOL, episode number 15. We are your hosts. I am Brent Warner.
And I'm Michelle Reyes.
Hi, Michelle.
Hey, Brand. How's it going?
I'm doing okay. It is May, and so for many of us, depending on what kind of school systems we're in, we may be looking at wrapping up our semester and moving into the summer. Either if we're college courses, probably this month. If you are teaching in K-12, then maybe next month or so. But we thought we'd do a topic today about encouraging independent learning during the pandemic, and we can't really do that unless we start encouraging students on ways to do it before they go into summer school, right? So we don't want them to go and then later tell them, hey, here's an email on some ways. We want to start talking to our students a little bit about ways that they can study, they can prepare, and so that they can actually learn for themselves during during the summertime when they might just be home, bored, possibly, all sorts of things going on.
Right.
So we're going to jump right into it and look at what the research says. So, Michelle, one of the things that we were looking up was summer learning loss, which is also has a couple different names, including the summer slide and language attrition, right?
Right.
And any of us who have learned another language, we have experienced this, right? Where we've when we take our breaks away from the language or whatever, it's like, oh, I knew this word, or I was better at that word before, right? And so we tried to grab a couple of articles to help us learn a little bit about it, and we're going to have you start off.
Right. So in reference to summer learning loss, there's an article published by the Brookings Institute called Summer Learning Loss. What is it and what can we do about it? This was written by Quinn and Polikoff in September of 2017. And what they talk about is something called the faucet learning theory. And this is a theory that the resources that our students are used to are usually provided they're widely available during the school year. But then as we come to the end of the school year and we get to that summer break, that fountain of resources, or that flow of resources, suddenly starts to dry up or become less there's not enough flow. And they talked about lower income students. This might impact lower income students more because they'll as summer comes into effect, their resource faucet now dries up, the overflow is no longer there. So it slows down dramatically for disadvantaged students, where on the other side, financial and human capital resources are still available for students that are of more advantaged backgrounds or already have parents with an education. And that's pretty scary right there.
Right, because we can basically say, hey, so many of us right now, we're making the assumption that our students have access to the internet at home, right?
Right.
And it's anybody listening to this show might even default to that because we're all listening to the podcast over the internet at some level, right? And so, but we also have to pay attention, students don't always have the internet at home. They don't always have access to even a computer that's good enough to run some of the technology that we might encourage them to use, right? And so all of these things it just keeps going down and down and down, deeper and deeper the more we think about it.
And as I've been looking on Twitter recently at all of our colleagues that are out there in the Twitterverse, and they're heading to their summer sessions or their summer breaks, and they're all wondering, how are they going to meet the need, or how are we going to make this more available for our students who don't have that equipment? Because even if they do have a computer, it might be a family computer, and if you've got siblings, that's other people that need to use that computer. Also, I think we tend to think that if you have availability to a smart or accessibility to a smart device, that means you have unlimited internet to access rather large files. And that's not always the case. Some of my students are on pay-as-you-go plans, and, to ask them to access something with data that they're paying themselves. That's just not, that's not right.
Right.
So, yeah, so that's what what the article talked about.
Yeah, another thing that I was looking at was from Arizona Public Media, which was this article that's from 2012, but it's called ELL Students Fall Behind After Summer of Limited English in the Border Town of Douglas, right? So this is talking about this idea of language attrition going on, and they're saying that basically there's a lot of students that are, when they go home, they're not using their English, like they would maybe be using it in school, and so they're spending their time all at home, maybe in a second language, and there's all sorts of issues going on with that. And so it was pretty interesting. So one of the things they said students in Arizona normally take about 3 years to master English. And then it said with summer breaks or longer breaks, this would lengthen the time that it would take for those students to catch up and to be ready. And so, there's lots of different studies about like what it takes to truly master academic
concept,
English, right? When we're talking about the difference between BICS and CALP, right? The basic interpersonal communication skills, and then the cognitive academic language processing. That's those are different levels too. And then it was just interesting to see how long it can take. And then when you get 2 or 3 months right there in between of break, so that's a quarter of the time inside of there, that's going to extend it as well. An interesting quote from there I thought was worth paying attention to. It said, though it's not quite fair to say that they don't have native competency in English. They do. They've grown up with it. But depending on how much it's used and how it's taught, then the final proficiency that they reach in English before leaving school may vary. What a great way to think about things, right?
Yeah, and we're talking about internalizing concepts, right? And that's right. They may have some they do have some competency in English, but the fact that if it's not being used in the home, if you're not actively activating that language piece in your brain, then you're not going to default to it when you're trying to explain, right? It's just going to be something that you study that's going to be put in the back of your mental filing cabinet, just as we did when we studied a language and we actually just memorized and didn't actually learn to use it or try to force ourselves to use it, right? So a research article from the University of California, Irvine, entitled English Vocabulary Trajectories of Students Whose Parents Speak a Language Other than English, Steep Trajectories and Sharp Summer Setback, discusses this very same idea that students are going to need extra time to catch up, especially if their parents are not speaking English. So this just kind of, the article is pretty lengthy, and there's a lot of information there on research that shows low-income students experience a summer loss, and also that home language status may be a stronger predictor of summer loss than socioeconomic status or reading amount.
Yeah, I thought this one was really interesting because this particular article, I mean, it like I said, it kind of needs its own reading. We don't have time to get into all the depth of it, but because they were researching basically the same socioeconomic group, they weren't really able to do outbreaks on like what the differences were between being wealthier or being poorer, but they were definitely showing this one, as far as vocabulary goes, is that your vocabulary would definitely go down if you're referring, of course, to the L1. And then they also pointed that they had a bigger setback and a steeper way to get back into courses the next semester. So when they're trying to go back into classes after the summer, they're really struggling for the first I think it was 6 to 8 weeks, and there's like, I don't remember any of this stuff, and so all of that time really gets lost amongst a lot of the students, and it's something to pay attention to and to really be aware of. So yeah, Esol, with all of these things, I think that this is what we want to kind of say is like, let our students know a little bit about this, and then try to provide them with some ways so that they don't necessarily suffer from this the summer learning loss this year around too, because they're going to probably feel like they have maybe even less support this time around because they can't even get out of the house, right? So if they're with their whole family, or if they're in a situation where they're really not speaking English, but they're living in America or wherever, that can be really, it can be really difficult for a lot of people to be self-encouraged to go on and keep building their language skills by themselves.
So we don't have any iTunes reviews this month. I guess all of April people were resuming, but not heading over to the podcast.
Are you saying that people have been not wanting to go online recently and not trying to? Yeah, so sad. Well, but there is kind of a little ray of silver lining in the cloud there, Esol, which is that since we know at this moment there are no extra reviews, so anybody who goes on and leaves a review is highly likely to win an exclusive DIESOL pin.
Woohoo! So head over there and make sure you give us a review, and we'll see if you win a pin.
You will. All right, so we're going to talk about some tools and techniques, and we'll jump into some of these things. Some ideas for basically what we can talk to students about, how we can share with them some ways to continue learning on their own, to be autonomous learners, especially during the summer when they're not going to have kind of the regularity of being able to talk to a teacher. I know some of them have already lost that because of the pandemic and all those things. But some, I see a lot of teachers that are regularly reaching out and maintaining contact, but that will definitely fall during the summer. So, Esol, what are some ways that you think that maybe teachers out there can encourage their students to become more autonomous and to continue to have growth during the summer in their language?
Right, Brent, as you said, I think it's important right now to start telling our students, start letting them know that this is a thing that happens in the summer, that summer loss is real. So they need to start being proactive about their own learning, right? They need to be doing that. But in order for that to be effective, instructors got to model. Just like we model everything else, we've got to model how to do this. This is not something that you just say, oh, plan what you're going to do, and then they plan, because you've got to teach how to plan, right? There's effective ways of planning and there are ineffective ways of planning. Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the things, I think just in general, not even for language learners, but you've got to set some goals, right? You've got to set 2 or 3 goals, because that's, our summer is about 2 or 3 months. You can do every couple of weeks, or you can do every month, but set some goals that are achievable. If you set way too many goals, if they're too general, then you're not going to be able to feel like you're successful, right? And then you always got to celebrate achievements. Once you've set your goals and you have a list of what you'd like to accomplish for the month of June or the month of July, then you want to go back and reevaluate, right? You're quantifying your own learning. You're saying, I did read that book in the month that I said I would, and I did check out those couple of websites, and I did do that exercise a couple of times to exercise my language. And then know that maybe some of those goals are going to change, and that's not a bad thing, right? You have learned. You're never the same as you were when you started, right? And so that's kind of hard sometimes to conceptualize. Yeah.
And so one thing here, when we talk about celebrating achievements, right? I often feel these days it's like, well, how do you celebrate? Like, how do you, how do you do these things? So even kind of in the old normal, it was like, okay, you treat yourself to something, like what do you do in order to celebrate? And now we're kind of stuck at home. So like some people might have said, I'm going to drive myself to the beach. And now the thing is, please do not go to the beach. Stay away from the beach. At the moment. It'll open up later, but you know what I mean? And so do you have any thoughts on like what could be some small ways to celebrate an achievement or to show that you're getting there?
And Brent, I hear the word celebrate maybe is a little bit, maybe it throws people off a little bit, but I like to write things down. Like I literally write, I accomplished this. I finished this. I read that with all these action verbs, because you are writing it down. And what you're basically doing is you're telling your own self narrative. And just like we were talking with Judy Haynes the other day in our podcast about one of the ways to help strengthen who you are and show self-care. I think sometimes celebrating doesn't have to be shared with the entire world. Right. I think sometimes it might just be for yourself. Like, this is a time when we really don't have an outlet. It could be just going for a walk and and like you said, taking pictures of things and posting something somewhere, could be for yourself, and say, today I finished blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Today I continued this. It's just so important to remind ourselves that even though we don't see immediate progress necessarily, doesn't mean it's not happening. And so I think it's important to recognize that it is happening and that things are changing.
You're good enough, you're smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like you. Right? Write that down on a piece of paper. Yeah, but there could be lots of different things, right? Again, it's like what's gonna be a little treat, or what's gonna be something that shows you some level of satisfaction that you've gotten through this. And so, yeah, I agree with any of those. And of course, if anybody listening has a great idea, drop us a line in the show notes here. We're always looking for better ways to be more clear about these things. So Esol, you had one or two other ideas for general ideas before we get into the specifics.
This is general. Again, in order to have these goals, you've got to make a habit of writing them down, or giving yourself deadlines. I think it's really important to have that, and remind yourself also that deadlines can be flexible, right? Because life gets in the way, or things get in the way, and you also don't want to limit yourself and feel like a failure because you didn't accomplish something. But they've got to be believable deadlines. So writing things in a calendar or a schedule, that just gives you a goal to look forward to. And I know that when I'm working on a workshop, or I'm working on certification modules, or anything at all, that sometimes it's just a harder thing to tick off your list of things to do. I give myself deadlines, and I give myself like, okay, by that time I'd like to accomplish. And then sometimes I don't accomplish what I set myself to finish, but I say, okay, but I did about 50% of it. That's still pretty good. I didn't quit. And I think that's important right now with language. It's very easy for our students to, they could get homesick perhaps. I mean, some of our students don't have flights back home. If they were planning on going back home, they're stuck here. So just, having those deadlines so that they're accomplishing something and they don't feel like they're quote unquote wasting time or not going anywhere. I think it's really important to have some kind of schedule. And I like the website futureme.org. If you've never heard of it, I know you've heard of it, Brent. It's a website where you can write yourself a note, and then it'll email you a reminder or email you that note. So you can have it be reminders to yourself. You can select specific dates. You do have to sign up, but it's free. And I know that a couple of my friends use it just, for affirmations, or maybe perhaps you want to thank your future self for something. This is something that students can do on their own, because if they set the goals now and they set themselves reminders now, then they'll get an email from their past self, reminding them of what they had set. What goals they had set.
Yeah, so you could encourage students to ask themselves questions for the future, right? Like, hey, your goal was to try to study, 10 vocabulary words every day or every week or whatever it is, right? How are you doing on your goal, right? And then they're going to get that email from themselves telling them this is the thing that you wanted to do. And that's a huge encouragement to themselves, rather than, just being pestered by a teacher possibly. and there's a lot of different things that you can do with this, but if you are, when we move beyond this, if you have a class that you recognize general attrition rates start happening around this time, you can encourage students to send themselves a message 1 week before the attrition rates start kicking in, right? Or something like that too. So that way they're like, oh yeah, that's right. I committed myself to doing this. Am I able to keep up with that commitment? All of those types of things. One other thing that you showed us in terms of the calendar that you're talking about, one of my favorite pieces of advice has always been, it's actually, I think it's from Jerry Seinfeld, which is having a wall calendar, right? And then just whatever activity that you do, you put a big red X through that day. And so then you see that link of ideas from one to the next, and it creates basically a daisy chain of X's on your wall calendar of I'm doing this. And so that encourages you, just because you mentally as a human, you want to see that link continue filling out, right?
Right.
And it's more visible. I do not like this idea on a cell phone, right? right? Because it's like, oh, I have to pull it out, I have to open it, whatever. But like on a big white wall calendar posted up right behind your computer or whatever, that's going to be real visible, and something that's a real clear reminder to you every day to do that work. So that's another possibility that you could share with your students. All right, so we're going to share a few actual, services and things like that. Some we've talked about in the past and some maybe we haven't, but there's lots of ways that we can get our students to continue studying and building their language on their own. And the first one that I thought I would share was Newsela, right? So we've talked a little bit about Newsela. In the past, it's a leveled reader, it's a tiered reader, so students can go in and they can sign up for themselves. They don't have to be in a class to get access to the website. But I was wondering, there's all these features like quizzes and power words and all these types of things. And so I reached out to them to try and figure out like what's available to students. And they wrote back and they said, okay, well, they can get access to it. They can get access to the full site for free. They don't have to have a teacher's account or they don't have to pay anything. But the only parts of the site that they would not be able to access outside of a teacher's class are the article activities. So that would be things like the actual quizzes, the power words, the the questions. So you have to be in rostered class to get access to those activities. But the ability to read at the different levels, which is the key feature of Newsela, would be available. So you could encourage students, hey, try to read an article a week or, whatever it is. And the great thing about Newsela is that students can choose for themselves whatever they're interested in. They can read about sports. They can read about the current things going on. They can read, they can read historical speeches by famous people, all sorts of things like that. So it can be really, really powerful. And again, it's about them finding something that's interesting to them, that it doesn't feel like it's work. It's like, oh, I want to read about this thing. And therefore, then they can just choose their level of what they want to read it.
Awesome. We love Newsela too. Another really cool tool that students can use on their own is called Readtheory.org. And this site offers similar like to Newsela. They offer different reading passages at different levels. But it also offers reading diagnostic tests that students can take so they can see where their level is, and then they can start reading from that level until they reach their frustration level. And then continue at that level, until they can, well, that's how we call it, the frustration level, right?
Yeah, right. Maybe not call it that for them when we're encouraging them to read.
All right, sure. They reach a level of challenge. I don't know.
You reach your growth level, and then you stretch, and then you continue your growth. I think that would be a better way to phrase it.
So it also offers. So each of those passages will test different reading strategies: prediction, inferencing, selecting the main idea, selecting details. There's also quizzes, and the quizzes are trackable, so students can see how they're doing over time. So I know that this is used from K through 12, but we use it with adults, and it's used for, reinforcing English all over the world. So readtheory.org, and it's a free website.
Excellent. So one that I kind of go back and forth to over the years is like, I get into it and I'm like, oh, this is so cool. And then I kind of like let it fade just because I'm busy with other things. And then I come back to it, is NoRedInk. Now, Esol, I think you and I actually talked about this several years ago.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. One of our mini workshops.
Yeah. And NoRedInk is very cool because basically what it does is students can go in there and they can choose whatever they're interested in as topics. So it gives you all these categories like movies and television and soccer players and singers and politicians or whatever it is that they're interested in. And they can click and say like, I like Harry Potter and I like the Avengers and I like Ronaldinho and I like, Michelle Obama, whatever they like, right? And then what it does is when it lets them practice with grammar and writing skills using those people and characters as their subjects and objects and points of reference as they're going through their learning. So Esol, I had shared with you, did a share screen with you a little bit ago, and we were talking about like the passive voice, right? And passive voice versus active voice, and it said, something like, you know, Harry Potter eats, or drinks the butterbeer or something like that.
Yeah.
And it says, well, okay, what's the active verb here? And you go, okay, click on drinks. But it's like, okay, because I like Harry Potter, then I maybe want to read a little bit more about it or whatever, or Simpsons, all these different things. And so as a student, they can actually go in and still get access to it without a teacher's paid account, similar to Newsela too, right? Like they can go in and they can get access to a number of the activities and of the writing skills and all these things that they're looking at. So NoRedInk, again, that they're working on building that self-motivation for students based on personal interests. And so, but it really digs more into specific writing and grammar skills. And it does little tutorials, like little trainings on like how this grammar point works, right? How does an article work and what are the basics of it? And then they can actually play around with it and quiz themselves and kind of work through. So NoRedInk is a great one to look at.
Very cool. And actually, I'd want to mention one that's maybe a little similar to that. It's called NoWord, KNOWORD. And NoWord is a word tool for people who love studying words and just families of words related to something. It's a free game that you can access online. And you can select different word sets. For example, you can select, mammals and marsupials, and they're going to give you a clue, and then they'll give you a clue like it rhymes with blah 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 blah, and it starts with this, and then you've got to guess the word. Now that's maybe for our more advanced students who want to practice words, but they already have a wide enough range that they can come up with these words. But there's also, and that's just like you said about with NoRedInk, you could select something that you like, but there's other things like you can look at verbs. You can look at just sports words. You can look at reflexive verbs. You can look at phrasal verbs. And so science vocabulary. So there's a lot there, and it is free. All of the basic stuff is free. And then they do have a paid option. I think it's $45 a year for a teacher to create their own word packs, but all the students have free access to it. They don't even need to sign in.
Cool. Yeah. This looks really interesting. I'm jumping in as you're talking about it. It's like, oh, okay, I can see what's going on here. So there's a lot of fun things to do here. I've never seen this before, so it looks really interesting. And it's pretty modern looking too. One that I was also just want to briefly share was Vocabulary.com. I think we've talked about this in the past too. Again, free student account, go in, whatever words you're interested in. And then the cool thing with Vocabulary.com is that you can also link that to, they have like all of these lists of books that you might be reading, and you can actually just say, hey, I'm reading this book, right? I'm reading, I don't know, Anne of Green Gables. I don't know why that came to mind, but but Anne of Green Gables, and then you click on that, and then it will give you a list of the vocabulary words that might be valuable for students, and then they can play games and do little quizzes and all sorts of things around it. So, so definitely one for people to look at. Again, Vocabulary.com is one of those things where like when students sign up and then it tells the teacher and it says, hey, they've been doing this, right? And even if it's not things that you assign, it's always nice to see that students are doing some work too.
Right. So we're now talking about reading and tying it to vocabulary. And there's this really cool app called Rivet App. And this is more for your young ELs. I think it goes from K through 8th, I want to say, but they've got all these free books that you can, and again, it's an app, you can just download the book by grade level, and it keeps track of their reading time. So I know that for our elementary school students, they're used to, having to track their hours. And I sometimes talk about how I hated having to log minutes or pages, but this is kind of, again, they're animated books, and the illustrations are done really well. There's a ton of material on there. In fact, I just recommended it to a couple of friends with little kids because this is just something they could be doing on their own. And it is free. And I believe it's available on most platforms. So it's Rivet App.
Cool. Yeah. And then one of my colleagues reached out to me recently, and I'm like, "What are you doing these days?" And he's like, "I found Libby." Right?
Oh, Libby.
Yeah,
Yes, I love Libby.
Yeah. So Libby is great. If you're not using Libby, and again, I think we've talked about it before, but just briefly, free audiobooks and free reading books on your smart device, and it's all connected to your local library. So you make an account with your local library, and then you can link it. So if you have multiple funded libraries, you can actually log into different libraries too, to go say like, oh, I want to go to this library or that library, and then whatever they have access to, you'll see on your list. And so if you want to listen to an audiobook, or if you want to read an ebook, you can get them all for free, instead of paying for the digital books on Kindle and all those types of things.
Right.
And so as much as I do like having a Kindle, and I do like having Audible and paying for the specific book that I want, sometimes I've found some really fun finds, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know about this, but I didn't want to pay for it because I'd never heard of it before, but I wanted to check it out, and then I really enjoyed them. And again, going back to just the value of libraries in general, but Libby, Libby.
Yeah, and I want to mention here that I've got a couple of friends who are just like Libby diehards, and they shared with me because I like physical books, but I also can read digital books, and sometimes you don't want to carry those with you. So I mean, there's the reasons why we use digital libraries, but you can actually register in libraries all over the world that are using Libby. There's lists out there that have your free libraries for people, and so I guess Libby fans collect libraries. So when they're traveling, they'll search in the area for the free library, sign up for a library card, because not everything requires, some libraries have, you need a physical address, etc., but not all of them do. So you can actually collect libraries, and you can be reading something from a library in another part of the world. So this is really cool. Yeah, I'll have to find my list. I'll have to find my list, because she gave me this extensive list of like Libby. There's just a collection of libraries you can.
Is that a secret list, or can you put it in the show notes?
No, I can put it in the show notes.
Nice.
I'll just have to find where I saved it. But yeah, Libby.
We also want to talk about podcasts, of course. As podcast nerds here, it continues to be a great way for students to just pursue what they're interested in, listen to ideas, listen to things that are different. And it's not, the same old boring, sorry to say this, but say the same old boring ESL content, right? What did you do today? I went to, the store. What did you do today? I didn't do anything.
Your canned, material.
Yeah, like all this stuff. So these are real authentic conversations and real, the podcast world, we've mentioned this before and we will continue, but it goes on and on to the extent of people's interests. And so, Esol, you put together a little mini list of a few different podcasts that you wanted to recommend.
Right. And so, of course, all of these are favorites. I've always recommended them to my students, and I'll continue. But one of them is the How I Built This podcast. And so they interview people who created things and how they came about. It could be something like Amazon, or it could be something like the Post-it note, or it could be something like, and it gives you so much language, and then you're actually learning, and they're just high interest. And so this was more for our intermediate to advanced listeners. I'm sure you've heard the show.
I've heard one or two episodes in the past, but not recently.
And so again, one of the things to remind the students, you don't have to sit through the whole thing. Don't have to listen to the whole thing in one sitting. Listen to the first 15 minutes. That's your goal. Then by nighttime, listen to the next 15 minutes. That's a goal. And then you've completed the one. And it just, it's just so interesting, this podcast. The next couple are maybe for younger listeners or are intermediate. I think they're still mature enough for maybe just beginning to intermediate listeners, and it's Brains on Science podcast. But although this is meant for maybe older elementary to middle school students, I've used it with my grad students.
Right.
And it's just the way your hosts are narrating something or talking about something. It's just in the right way that engages students, but it also has a lot of academic language. So I've used them a lot. So I would not just say just for kids. I think these are for all our EL students across the board. The next one is Wow in the World. And this is also a science podcast. And it's tailored toward kids. This one's maybe a little bit more for your younger learners or your younger ELs, maybe K through 12. Same. It's a science podcast, which I really, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's through NPR as well.
I don't think so.
Wow in the World is really interesting as well. And then finally, because it's really hard to narrow it down, but I also wanted these to be like high interest because there's so many great podcasts out there, but we want them to keep listening on their own. And this one's called Life Kit, and it's just things that you probably should know how to do in life, and they walk you through it. And it's a life kit. It's
I like
strategies for life, and I think anyone can use it, and it's got enough vocabulary that is not too difficult. But so for example, the latest one is on screen time overload. There was one on staying safe when you go to the grocery store. Here there are all sorts of different topics, but it's a really good podcast to maybe listen through over the summer.
And I like giving students NPR ones in general because it gives them high production value before they kind of get like too into the world, and they're like, oh, this can be really easy, and then they can kind of move around inside of the NPR lists as well. And then some of my students start saying like, once they start working with it, then they go, oh, I found this one on NPR too, and it was really, really interesting. And so then once they start building out and they know that, hey, here's a source where I can get started, that really is awesome. So also for anyone listening, if you guys have good shows that you think are useful for students, please go into the show notes at diesel.org/15 and leave us a note about a show that we should be checking out too, because we want to hear, because we're always looking for more, and not wanting to repeat the same ones over and over again, but these ones are great, but there's also so many different options. So,
right.
All right. And the last one here, Esol, I didn't know if I wanted to talk about this on the show yet because I haven't actually done it yet, but I have been thinking about it, which is, with Netflix, there's an app, for Google Chrome called Netflix Party. Have you ever heard of this?
No, you've told me about it, and it's the first. I had no idea.
Yeah, so Netflix Party is a Chrome extension. It goes up into your Chrome, and so when you watch Netflix on your Chrome browser, you can actually send out a link to other people who have Netflix, and then they can click on that, and they will be synced with the Netflix movie or show that you're watching, and everybody who has that link can watch it all at the same time, and then you can join a shared chat with everybody, right? So so it's a great way to like, hey, we're going to watch the same movie, we're going to kind of talk about it as we're going through. And so I've been thinking about this idea for my students called Netflix and Skill.
I like it.
Which is the idea. I think I'm not totally sure. I think I want to do it weekly, maybe bi-weekly, every other week, not twice a week. But where students can jump in, watch a movie together with me, and then I can ask questions, or I can just throw out ideas or maybe unclear vocabulary to students as they watch the movie. And I want it, for me, I threw this out on Twitter a little while ago. I said, hey, what are some ideas for good movies that kind of teach a little bit about American culture? And so I've been trying to collect a list of some of those movies so that we can actually, share some ideas. And it's not just like some dumb movie that doesn't really serve any purpose, but like they continue to grow and learn, and it's a decently good movie, but also kind of contributes to some of American life in our particular situation. Of course, wherever you are in the world, you might want to customize that to your culture that you're trying to teach your students about. But yeah, so Netflix Party seems like it can be a really cool way to continue to engage students, and then low stress, hey, just come hang out if you want to. There's no commitment to it beyond beyond just watching a movie. And if you want to see the notes that I'm putting on the side, or if you want to ask questions about the movie as we're going, that's great. You could also just do this with your friends. So you wouldn't have to be like led by a teacher, any students themselves. As you say, hey, why don't you guys watch a movie together with your classmates? Maybe you guys you speak different languages, so you use English as your common language. Great ways to continue building and working in English even outside of the class.
That is really cool. So that actually kind of makes me think of an idea, gives me an idea. So I've been keeping in touch with my students who are fasting, because it's the month of Ramadan. And so they're fasting right now. And they usually, right about the time when they break fast, which is iftar, they're sending pictures of what they're about to eat, of what they're preparing. And you see like all these great feasts. But wouldn't it be awesome if for iftar, you could have on one of the days a Netflix and skill night, where they're all going to have iftar, and right after iftar either watch a movie or watch during iftar, but then you're doing it collectively, especially in cultures where being together is during these times is so special and sacred. And many of our students may be away from their families and don't have that. I think that idea is really cool. That's a cool goal to have. Yeah, I like it.
So as I build this a little bit more, I'll try to post or get some information on Twitter about exactly what I'm doing. But I think that this could be a really, really cool way to, especially, that whole thing, we can't get together, but we can get together.
Right. And now it's time for our fun finds. Today, my fun find is an album. Oh. It's actually a shocker because it's usually an app or cosmetics, but it's an album by Lewis Capaldi. He's a Scottish singer. And I don't know, since I've had so much time in front of the screen, now one of the things that I've started doing that I couldn't do at the beginning, because it took a while to just concentrate and learn how to work from home. I like to have a little bit of soothing music in the background, and I don't turn it on very loud, but if you've never heard of Lewis Capaldi, and have you, Brent? Have you heard of him?
No.
He's like the male Adele. He's just got amazing vocals, and you just turn it on in the background. And I like to light a scented candle while I'm doing my Zoom. No, I mean like my Zoom meetings. It helps me to.
That sounds like a sexy Zoom meeting.
No, not like that. I mean, I don't want to associate home with coronavirus. I don't want to associate home with working from home, because we've been doing it now for me 7 weeks, and I just want to have that later when I smell that candle. I want to think positive things, and so like that's sort of like trying to associate it with positive things is what I'm doing. So Lewis Capaldi, guys, check him out. He's awesome.
I like it. Okay, so mine is an Instagram account that actually a friend of mine is making. And so it's at the very beginning levels right now, but it's called Flipside Fiction. And it's done by Sean Zebarth, who's a great teacher in this area. And basically what he's doing is he's making these little zines, and it's such a cool concept. So basically he is making a zine, and on the front of the zine, it starts with a lyric from a song, and on the back of the zine, it ends with a lyric from a song, and then in between, he's writing fiction that kind of connects it, and it's a 7-inch, just like 7-inch vinyl, because it's based on the idea of like a single, right? And so I think it's either 333 or 450 words based on the 33 and a third or the 45 RPMs. It's like this whole concept. It's very cool. But then he just writes this basic fiction, and it's a zine, but he's publishing it on Instagram. So it's a few pages long, simple fiction, not a lot of words. Again, like I said, 333 to 450 words. So quickly readable. But I just thought it's such a cool project to be doing, and it could inspire people to figure out other ways to like mix different mediums and be creative. Even though we're at home, like there's still lots of ways to share out what you're doing. And so check that out on Instagram. It's at Flipside Fiction.
Cool.
All right, we're wrapping up. So thank you so much for listening to the show. We are happy to be able to talk with each other and to talk with you guys. We've been getting more and more listeners every time, and so thank you for tuning in. We hope that we're continuing to provide some value for everybody. As we said, there's room for you to win a DIESOL pin, so go ahead and drop us a review.
Yeah, you can do that on Apple Podcasts. And if you're giving us a shout out any other way, tag us on social media or shoot us an email.
And we are continually happy to be part of Voice Ed Canada. So our great neighbors to the north at VoiceEd, voiced.ca, and so many great shows on there for you to check out. If you want more education radio, you can just listen all day long. So it's worth looking at.
And you can find more on this episode and our show notes at diesel.org.
And you can find us on Twitter. You can find the show at DieselPod, and you can find me at Brent G. Warner.
You can find me, Esol, at ixy_pixie. That's IXY_PIXY.
And in Swahili, thank you is asante. So, asante for tuning in to the DIESOL podcast.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.